The restaurant was the kind of place that made you feel like your life was finally going somewhere. Soft amber lighting, white tablecloths, jazz. Playing low enough that you could hear the person across from you without leaning in. I'd made the reservation 3 weeks in advance. Table for 4, corner booth, window view. I'd been planning this double date with my best friend Dorian and his girlfriend, Priya, for almost a month, and I'd spent the better part of the afternoon convincing myself that tonight was going to be perfect. My date, Camille, looked stunning. Dark red dress, hair pinned up on one side, the kind of nervous smile that told me she was trying just as hard as I was. We'd been seeing each other for about 6 weeks, not long enough for things to feel easy, but long enough to feel the possibility of something real. Dorian was already halfway through his breadbasket when we arrived, and Priya threw her arms around me like we hadn't seen each other in years. Even though it had only been 2 weeks, everything was exactly right. Then the door opened and Nadia walked in. I saw her before she saw me. She was standing near the host stand, still in her work clothes, charcoal blazer, hair half fallen out of whatever it had been that morning, mascara that had clearly not survived the day intact. She looked like someone who had driven 40 minutes without music, just trying to keep it together. I knew that look because I had seen it on her before, years ago, when things between us had been falling apart in slow motion. Nadia and I had dated for 2 years. We ended things 18 months ago, mutually and, I thought, cleanly. There was no villain in that story. We just wanted different things at different speeds, and eventually the gap between us became too wide to keep pretending it wasn't there. We hadn't spoken much since. A few texts on birthdays, a brief run-in at a mutual friend's housewarming last spring. Nothing that qualified as real contact. So when her eyes found our table and she froze, not with guilt, but with something more desperate than that, I didn't know what to feel. Dorian saw her a second after I did. He set down his bread and looked at me with an expression that said, "This is not my problem, but I will absolutely watch it unfold." Priya turned around and then Camille followed her gaze, and suddenly all 4 of us were looking at Nadia, like she was a painting that had walked off the wall. She came over. Of course she came over. There was nowhere else for her to go. "I'm sorry," she said. And she meant it. I could tell because her voice cracked on the second word. I texted Dorian. "I didn't know you'd be here. I needed to see a familiar face, and his was the first one I thought of." Dorian's face confirmed this. He shrugged in a way that was both apologetic and completely unhelpful. She looked at Camille, then at me, then at the table with the 4 carefully arranged place settings, and I watched her understand exactly what she had walked into. "I'll go," she said. "I'm so sorry. I really am." She turned to leave. I don't know what made me do it. Some combination of the way her shoulders were carrying, something invisible and heavy, and the memory of who she used to be when things were good, and the simple fact that I was a person who believed you didn't leave. Someone standing alone in a restaurant, when they were clearly not okay. "Nadia," she stopped. "Sit down." Camille looked at me. It wasn't an angry look, it was a careful one. The kind of look that was deciding something. "We have a chair," I said to Camille, and I meant it as an explanation rather than an apology. And she's clearly not all right. There was a pause that lasted about 3 seconds and felt like 3 minutes. Then Camille picked up her menu and said, "I'll have the salmon." Someone ask her what she wants. I could have kissed her right there. Nadia sat down. She ordered a glass of water and then, at Priya's insistence, a bowl of soup. For the first 10 minutes she barely spoke. The 4 of us carried the conversation around her gently, like people navigating furniture in a dark room, and slowly, the way people do, when warmth is offered without conditions. She started to come back to herself. Her mother had been hospitalized that afternoon. A cardiac episode, not catastrophic, but serious enough to turn the whole day sideways. Nadia had been sitting alone in a hospital waiting, room for 3 hours before being told her mother was stable. And then she had gotten in her car and driven without a real plan, because sometimes stability isn't enough to stop the shaking. She hadn't wanted to call her sister, who was already managing 2 kids and a difficult pregnancy. She hadn't wanted to call her friends, most of whom were in relationships now and seemed to exist in that warm, insulated world where emergencies felt smaller. She had texted Dorian because Dorian had known her mother, had sat at her mother's kitchen table more than once, had eaten her cooking, and called her formidable in the most affectionate way possible. "She always liked you," Nadia said to Dorian, and she smiled for the first time all evening. Dorian reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "She's going to be fine," he said, with the kind of confidence that wasn't reckless. It was the kind built from caring. The evening shifted after that. It became something else, something I hadn't planned for and couldn't have, something better in the way that unplanned things sometimes are. We stayed at that table for 2.5 hours. Priya told a story about her own grandmother's hospitalization. 2 years earlier that made Nadia laugh and then almost cry and then laugh again. Dorian ordered dessert and pushed it to the center of the table like a declaration. Camille, and this was the thing I kept returning to, asked Nadia real questions. Not polite ones, real ones. What was her mother like? What had made her laugh today, even in the waiting room? What was she most afraid of? Nadia answered all of them honestly. At one point, while Dorian and Priya were debating something trivial about the dessert menu, Camille leaned over to me and said quietly, "You did the right thing." "I wasn't sure you'd think so," I admitted. She considered this for a moment. I think who someone is in an unexpected moment tells you more about them than anything they could plan. She looked at me in a way that was direct and warm at the same time. I like what I found out tonight. I didn't have a good response to that. I don't think one was needed. When we finally left, the restaurant was mostly empty. The jazz had given way to something quieter, just piano. Nadia stopped me on the sidewalk while Dorian hailed a cab for her. "I need you to know," she said, "that I didn't come here for you. I wasn't. This wasn't some attempt to—" "I know," I said. "I just needed—" "I know, Nadia." She exhaled. "She's really great," she said, nodding toward Camille, who was a few steps away talking to Priya. "I mean it. She's the kind of person who makes other people feel like they're allowed to exist." That was one of the most precise things I'd ever heard someone say about another person. I filed it away. "Take care of yourself," I told her, "and call your sister." She made a face. "She'll make it about the pregnancy." "She'll make it about you. You're the one who'll make it about the pregnancy." Nadia laughed, a real one, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than the evening. The cab arrived. She got in. She didn't look back through the window, and I didn't expect her to. I walked back to Camille. She took my arm without being asked, and we started down the block behind Dorian and Priya, the city moving around us the way it does, indifferent and alive, full of people with their own unplanned evenings and unexpected tables. "So," she said, "is that a normal Friday for you?" "No," I said. "That was a first." "Good." She leaned into me slightly as we walked. "I don't think I could do that every week." "But you did it tonight." She was quiet for a moment. Then, she needed a table. We had one. She said it simply, the way simple things deserve to be said. We got coffee at a place 2 blocks from the restaurant. Just the two of us, Dorian and Priya having peeled off to go home. We sat by the window and talked until almost midnight. Not about Nadia, not about the strange shape the evening had taken. Just about ourselves. The ordinary and unhurried version of getting to know someone that is maybe the most underrated thing in the world. Walking home alone afterward, I thought about what Nadia had said. The kind of person who makes other people feel like they're allowed to exist. I thought about how rare that was. How most of us spent so much of our lives guarding our tables, our plans, our evenings, our carefully arranged place settings, that we missed the moments that actually mattered. I had made a reservation for 4, but the best part of the night had been the 5th chair.